So welcome to this latest video 162 Maths, and in this video we'll be going over some exam questions related to box plots or box and whisker diagrams. Now as always, I'll include a copy of the questions that we go through in this video in a link in the description below before going through some general notes on this particular topic. Now before we get started working through some past exam questions related to box and whisker or box plots, let's just have a quick overview over some revision notes. Now the key thing, not only do you need to know how to plot a box plot, you also need to know its key features. So just going over what the key principles are. So this value here, there are 5 main things you need to do to draw a box plot. So you need to know the smallest value, you need to know the lower quartile, you need to know the median, you need to know the upper quartile, and you need to know the largest number or the biggest number. And obviously that the IQR is equal to the upper quartile minus the lower quartile. Now sometimes the upper quartile is known as Q3 and the lower quartile is Q1 and the median is Q2, but it all just refers to quarters, hence the word of the quartiles. So this value that goes here is the smallest. This value here is the lower quartile, this value here is the median, this value here is the upper quartile, and this value here is the largest value. Now your box plot has to look like this. It's got to have whiskers, it's got to have a box, and there's got to be a line inside that box. If it doesn't look like that, you're not going to get the marks for it. Now in terms of labelling the scale, now often this is already going to be done for you within the question, but if it isn't, then make sure you do include it. Now the scale must be labelled with the units. That's really important. If failure to do that may cost you a couple of marks. And also the scale does not have to start from 0. It can start from absolutely any number you want, but just make sure that they are equally spaced and your scale is exactly the same way as you would do for a normal graph. Remember, you don't need to do a vertical scale for a box and whisker diagram. Now in terms of the key aspects in terms of notes, now the range is basically the length between the whiskers. So this length here from this length is the range. Then the interquartile range is basically the length of the box. So it's important that you recognize the difference between the two. Now the median, which is the average, is the line that's inside the box. The lower quartile is the 25% mark. So if I just get rid of some of this noting, which I've just realized I've got rid of that line, which I need to bring back, and let me just draw that line in like so. So this region here is 25%. Even though it may not look like it, it's basically 25% of the data. Then this bit here is the next 25%. This next bit here is the next 25%, and running out of colours, this distance between the upper quartile and the largest value is your next 25%. So it's all split into quarters, even though it may not look like it's split into quarters, but that's basically because the data. So that's where this whole point of a box and whisker diagram comes in handy. Now the next thing we move on to is commenting. Now this usually applies when you have got 2 box plots. Now this usually goes in when you've got one drawn for you and you need to draw another one, or you draw one and then they give you data about another one. Now when commenting, you always want to focus on 2 bits. The first one is commenting on the average. Now this is where you are comparing the median values. Now either you calculate the median values or you look at the box plot to decide, and you also need to decide, is it better to have a small median or a large median? And that all depends on the context of the question. So for example, if it's based around exam mistakes, then you want to have a smaller median because you want to make less mistakes rather than a large median. Whereas if it's about test scores, you want to have a higher median rather than a lower median because it means you scored better overall. You also then want to comment on the consistency. Now the consistency is basically a measure of the interquartile range. Now a smaller IQR basically means it's more consistent, and when it's more consistent means it's easy to predict. Whereas a large IQR means that the data is all mixed up, they're all different numbers, and it's less easy to predict and a lot more volatile. Now when you are commenting on these things, as well as trying to go into detail about the meanings, try and quote the numbers as well. Now sometimes in mark schemes I've seen that they give you marks for quoting the numbers, sometimes they don't, but if you've got time, try and quote the numbers, even if it's just blatantly obvious and they've already given you a number form in the question, but just try and state those numbers of the median and the interquartile range to support your comment on the average or the consistency. So now let's have a look at some past exam questions. Now, a little reminder, if you want an access to these questions, all you need to do is just simply click on the link in the description. So looking at question 1, it says that here is a box plot and it says write down the interquartile range. Well, the interquartile range is the length of the box. So this length here is 72 and this length here is 40. So the interquartile range is going to be 72, take away 40, which is 32. Then it says write down the value of the median. Well, the median is this line here, and that is at 58. Now you always want to make sure that you're recognizing the scale and reading the scale correctly. For question C, it says work out the value of the upper quartile. So the upper quartile is this mark here, which I've used, which seems a bit odd for part A, but that there is 72. Moving on to question 2, it says the diagram shows a box plot. Write down the lower quartile. Well, this value here is my lower quartile, which going up in 2s, I make out to be 26. It then says work out the range. Well, the range is the biggest value, which is 90, minus the smallest value, which is 10. So that gives me an answer of 80. It then says for question 3, here is some information about the length of time customers spent in a shopping centre. And it says the shortest time was 24 minutes, the longest time was 12 hours, lower quartile was 3 hours, interquartile range was 4 hours, and the median time was 6. Now, one thing to note is that the shortest time is given to me in minutes, so I need to convert that into hours. So 24 over 60 is dividing both numbers by 6, so that becomes 4 over 10, which is 0.4. So my smallest value needs to be there. And again, make sure you are using a ruler. Now the longest value is 12, so that's going to be there. Now the lower quartile is 3, which is here, and the box I've drawn just to save a bit of time. Now the upper quartile is basically the lower quartile plus the interquartile range. So then the upper quartile is going to be 3 plus 7, 3 plus 4, which is 7. So this here is my upper quartile. This is my lower quartile, and it tells you that the median is 6. So all that's left for me to do is then draw my whiskers, which again should be drawn with a ruler, which I'm not setting a very good example, but there we should have our box whisker now. Notice that it does look a bit scruffy simply because I haven't used a ruler, so make sure in your exam you do use a straight edge. Moving on to question 4, it says courgettes are grown in a greenhouse or in a garden. The box plot shows data about their length in centimetres, and it says write down the median length of the courgettes grown in the greenhouse. So basically it's asking me to know where this line here is, and that is 28. It then says give 2 comparisons about the length of the courgettes grown in the greenhouse and in the garden. So if I just zoom out just a little bit so we can see. Now your first comment always needs to be about the average, which in other words, talking about the median. Now as you can see, the medians in both the greenhouse and the garden are very similar. So the lengths of the courgettes, I should say on average, the lengths of the courgettes are very similar in length. And again, quoting the numbers, it's going to be 27 centimetres and 28 centimetres. If you were to say that the lengths of the courgettes are higher on average in the greenhouse than the garden, then that would be correct. But 27, 28 centimetre in courgettes, does size matter? Again, some may argue that it does. So again, any of those statements would be absolutely fine. Then for the second statement, you then want to comment on the consistency. So again, if I just zoom out a little bit here so we can just see both, and let me just alter the screen so we got it there. So here you want to comment on the consistency stroke the IQR. So here you can say that the lengths in the greenhouse are more consistent And again, quoting the IQR values, it's 15 and 11 centimetres. And again, if you want to do that, then that's absolutely fine. But a comment on the average, a comment on the consistency, and it being correct should be good enough to get the 2 marks. Then moving on to question 5, let's just zoom in so we can see it and watch it reset. There we go. So it says the box plot represents the marks gained by students in a maths test. Nobody gained exactly 45, 70 or 90 marks. 8 students gained less than 45 marks. How many students gained more than 70 marks? So the 70 marks is here. Now, as we mentioned when we went through the notes, that from the smallest value to the lower quartile, that's 25%. Then the lower quartile to the median is another 25%. The median to the upper quartile is 25%. And the upper quartile to the largest value is another 25%. So it says how many students gained more than 70 marks? Well, it's going to be 25 plus 25. Well, it tells us that 8 students gains 45 marks. So that's 45 marks. So basically, well, it's telling us that 25% equals 8. 50% scored more than 70. So 8 times 2 gives me an answer of 16. Then moving on to question 6, it says the box plot shows information about marks of a year 10 class in a test. The table shows information about marks of the girls in the class, and it says draw the box plot for the marks of the girls. So here minimum value is 70. The lower quartile is 75. The upper quartile is 85. The median is 80. And the maximum value is 90. So again, with a straight edge, with a ruler, you need to draw your box plot. So it should look something like that. Now for question 6b, it then says 1/4 of the boys in the class scored less than 65. So that's basically telling us that the lower quartile is at 65, which is what we've marked here. The interquartile range for the boys is double the interquartile for the girls. So the IQR for the boys is going to be 10 times 2, which is 20. So 65 plus 20 equals the upper quartile. So the upper quartile is going to be at 85, which is there. Now to find the lowest value, well, if we look at the lowest value of the class, we make that out to be roughly around about 58. Now the smallest value that the girls got was 70, which means that a boy must have got the lowest value, so that must be at 58. So let's just find 58 and draw a line like so. Now, for the maximum of the class was roughly, I made that to be 91. And the high score that a girl got was 90, so that means that boy must got the highest mark. So we then need to find 91, and that's where that needs to be. So that's going to be at 91, and that is at 58. So the next thing that's left for me to do is decide where the median is going to be. Now, the class average was 78. The girl average was 80, which means that the boys must have dragged that class average down. So that means that the average needs to be somewhere between, well, definitely less than 80. So anywhere less than 80. So let me just write, so median must be between 65 and 78. Sorry, 80, that should be. So I've picked out 78. So anywhere in this region here is where the median should be, but you definitely do need to write down that median, even though the information's not been given, and this is one of the reasons why it's worth 4 marks. So if I just pick a random place, that would be absolutely fine. Moving on to question 7, it would then move on to a stem leaf diagram, which I'll be honest has been taken off the AQA scheme of work, but I'm not sure why it's there, but again you can still read the information from it. But so here it says Rob shot a set of arrows in 15 archery rounds. The stem and leaf diagram shows the number of points he scored in each round. So looking at this, we first of all, you can either write out all of those 15 numbers. So we've got 6, 11, 11, 13, 15, 17, 17, 19, 20, 20, 20, 25, 29, 29 and 31. Then from this you then want to find the median, which if you've done this correctly should be 19. You then want to find your lower quartile, which in this case is going to be 13, and your upper quartile, which is going to be 25. And then you've got your smaller value, which is 6, and your upper value, which is 31. So looking at this, this is my value there. My lower quartile is here, my upper quartile is here, my median value is 19, which is going to be there, and my smallest value was 6, which is there, and then all that's left for me to do is just draw the whiskers, and there we go. Now for 7b, it then says that the box represents the points that Kathy scored in 15 archery rounds. Kathy says that I'm better and a better archer than Rob. Give 2 reasons to support her statement. So for this, you could write something along the lines of where you're comparing the median, and then you want to write your second comment where it's comparing the IQR. So first things first, on average, her score was higher. And basically it's a higher median. And you then want to mention something about being more consistent. So she's more consistent, and she's got a smaller IQR. And if you want to give the values, you can do, but again, just stating the obvious of stating those statements should be good enough for the 2 marks. If they want you to quote the numbers, they would say, but I certainly would provide some mathematical evidence to support whatever you've written.